Atunci când spui Alba Iulia, spui în primul rând istorie. Daci, romani, Apulum, Mihai Viteazu, nobilime transilvaniană, Horea Cloșca și Crișan, unire, încoronare. Alba Iulia este orașul în care mândria de a fi român este mai puternică decât oriunde altundeva. În același timp, Alba Iulia este, fără îndoială, un oraș dinamic, în continuă schimbare. Acest lucru se datorează, în special, atragerii de fonduri europene. Vorbim despre numai puțin de 150 de milioane de euro, bani care au fost atrași pentru modernizarea și dezvoltarea municipiului. În jur de 60 de milioane de euro au fost angajate în proiecte de dezvoltare urbană. Cea mai importantă investiție publică din ultimii ani a fost restaurarea cetății Alba Carolina, a cărei transformare este de-a dreptul remarcabilă. Este doar unul dintre numeroasele proiecte pe care administrația le-a dus la bun sfârșit. De asemenea, autoritățile locale au dezvoltat și reabilitat centrul vechi, economic al orașului, infrastructura rutieră și cea sportivă, s-au construit piste de biciclete și au renovat mai multe parcuri din oraș, unul fiind creat la marginea orașului într-o zonă deosebită, Parcul Dendrologic Dr. Ioan Vlad. Preocuparea continuă a autorităților locale de a îmbunătăți calitatea vieții a făcut ca Alba Iulia să se afle în fața unei noi premiere. Municipiul a fost gazda unei conferințe axată pe dezvoltarea urbană a orașelor, susținută de arhitectul danez Jan Gehl, recunoscut la nivel mondial pentru analiza spațiilor publice urbane și soluțiile de îmbunătățire a calității vieții în orașe. În contextul proiectării urbane bazate pe creșterea rapidă a populației și a traficului în orașe, conferința a abordat ca temă principală dezvoltarea urbană a orașelor, în cadrul căreia dimensiunea umană ocupă primul loc. Prezența lui Jan Gehl la Alba Iulia, în contextul marilor aprecieri internaționale aduse activității sale, reprezintă totodată un semn de recunoaștere al potențialului orașului. Jan Gehl este profesor de design urban la Școala de Arhitectură din cadrul Academiei Regale Daneze de Arte Frumoase din Copenhaga și partener fondator al Gehl Architects.
Good morning or good day, and thank you very much for coming today, and thank you, Alba Iulia, for the most fantastic, friendly welcome I've received in this city. It's been a great experience for me to visit and to find out the fantastic spirit and civic pride there is about this city, and I can understand it when I've been around and seen some of the good gems you have in this city. Today I will talk about livable cities for the 21st century, and my point is really that being good to people in the city, being good to the pedestrians and maybe the bicycles, if you have some, that is a city planning strategy which is a very good idea to have a livable city for the 21st century. So this is my major point.
Înainte de a vorbi despre strategia de planificare urbană a orașelor, Jan Gehl a povestit puțin despre viața sa.
I will start to tell you about, in a short version, the story of my life. I was trained as an architect in the 1950s, and at that time the big thing was modernism. And much of our time in School of Architecture, it went by learning how to do good cities. And we were taught that we should have some objects and then we should move the objects around on a model, hanging over the model. Bingo, this is a good scene. I went out of School of Architecture. I was really enthusiastic, and I was going to do all these wonderful things which was told in school was very good for cities. Then I married a psychologist. And then at once we had other discussions in the house. Why are you architects not interested in people? Why don't you learn anything about people in school of architecture? Many serious questions were raised, and actually we found out that the borderland between architecture, psychology and sociology was completely uncovered. The architects and engineers did their buildings, and the sociologists and the psychologists did the people, and they didn't talk to each other. Then I had to go back to university for 40 more years. I really tried to find out how people were influenced by the physical structures and how we could make where people would like to be, where people would not like to be, how they use the spaces, and generally trying to make people visible in architecture and planning because they were invisible at that point. I wrote a few books, and now I'm an elderly person. It's a great joy for me to see that these books are used in all parts of the world, and especially I'm happy to see that this kind of humanistic city planning is now being studied in a number of developing countries. I'm very proud that all my books are published in China. And I know that they are widely distributed because I've been asked to sign all of them. That is big work. And what is really troubling me at this point is that obviously they've not had time to read them over there, but maybe. So after 40 years in university, many mayors around the world started to say you can criticize, but can't come and show us what we shall do. And then that was the start of forming a planning consultancy called Gale Architects, where we hoisted the flag saying if you want livable, sustainable and healthy cities, we can help you. And at once the phone started ringing, and it's been ringing ever since, and we are now a lot of people in several countries working on this. Of course they are all having bicycle helmets, and the logo is behind, because my people, they're so fast that you only see them from behind. In just 15 years where we have had this company, I've seen, much to my surprise, that in all corners of the world there is this strong urge to have better quality for people. So all these cities and many more we have worked on in just the 15 years, from in North Greenland, Nuuk, to South Christchurch after the earthquake, to we are working now in Tokyo here and in San Francisco over there. So all over the world we found this enormous interest, or rather hunger after knowledge about how to make better cities for people. Then I was happily out of university and doing all this consultancy, and then I had a sponsor, a Danish Foundation for the Built Environment, who had been very generous in my university days by saying that all this about people, that's very important research. They have all the time in university, they say how many millions do you need for the research this year. And then later on, when I was in my own firm, they suddenly came again and said, Jan, we would like you to sit down and write down everything you know while you can still remember it. And I said, no, I'm very busy now. But then they said, isn't busy a matter of how many assistants you can have. And then they did this game again, and suddenly I had time. And then we made this book, Life Cities for People, which has come out in all the major languages, as you can see, Romanian, and even French, for the first time in 40 years. They started to be humanistic in the French-speaking world, not in Paris, by the way, but in Montreal. And then, there's also one in Russian, and there's one in Greece. Actually, it's out in 30 languages at this point. What is this book about? It is about the shift from the good old days to modern planning, and also the shortcomings of modern planning and what to do now.
Cunoscutul arhitect a realizat în cadrul conferinței o trecere în revistă a modului în care s-au dezvoltat orașele din 1960 și până în prezent.
In all the traditional cities all over the world, city planning was done one house by one house. It was done along the streets. It was done in human scale. It was made for slow traffic. It was made for pedestrians and maybe horses. And in all over the world, this is from Greece. No, this is from Italy, and this is from China, and Japan. In all parts of the world, the traditional cities look the same, because they are built on the body of your Homo sapiens. They are observing how our senses work, how we can move. So they are made ideally for people to have a good time. That was the tradition, doing it one by one, and that meant that experiences for many generations could go into these. So these settlements are full of experiences from many generations of how to make good city. All this was changed around, I say 1960. But some of these ideas, they started early on. But we had around 1960 two major changes in city planning. Everything was going modern. And we had one very dominating new paradigm was modernism. Everything old was thrown out. The modernists, they said, now we have modern man, so we have modern city planning, modern site planning, modern architecture. Everything old is not good. In this process, they forgot everything we knew about people in cities. And they started doing these buildings where actually the objects were the major things. And what was happening here was really, Corbusier was saying that cities are bad, freestanding buildings are good, streets and squares are bad, grass is good, grass and trees, that's good for people. And instead of making spaces, public spaces in the settlements, they started to have leftover spaces between the buildings. So this was the introduction of modernism, and that was a very strong movement which threw away everything of the past. What really happened at that time was that the city started to expand. The economy was going better after the Second World War, and all over the world the city started to expand. And to overview this complex situation, the city planners virtually took off in aeroplanes and started to organize their cities like this. So the city planners were flying over here and putting down the objects and making leftover space. The site planners, they flew a little bit lower in helicopters and adjusted a little bit. But what was the case was that there was no one who looked after where people were. So for the first time in history, nobody looked after the people landscape. The architects didn't learn about it, the landscape architects didn't learn about it, the planners couldn't see it at all from up there. And that meant that for a long, long period, all the aspects of people in cities were completely overlooked. And I would say that if you ask at any time in history a band of professionals to make something which is unattractive for people, just give the task to some modernists. And you will have some lovely examples of things here. I always would think about this little bench as a wonderful place to take your girlfriend and sit and talk about what a wonderful world the two of you are going to make in the future. Modernistic living. So one would think that the architects and the planners did not love people. Oh no, they really loved people, because every time they made any project, they filled all the drawings with happy people doing silly things. We call it people washing. So whenever you go to a mayor with a project, you people wash it, and he thinks it's a good project. Because people only come to places which are nice. If they're not nice, they go home right away. So we all do this in the drawings, and in reality it may likely be like this, modernism. Not a good thing for people in the cities. There were good things about modernism because they introduced fresh air and light and running water and toilets and a few other things. And but we'll not talk about that today. We'll talk about the social part of the city building, the public landscape, and how people have related to each other throughout history. The other paradigm which started really to take off in the western part of Europe in 1960, and in America also, Australia, Canada, all over, we saw the car invasion. And the moment the cars started to invade, every energy was put into trying to make the cars happy. And there was almost no other problems in city planning than traffic and capacity. All cities in the world at once had a transport department, and all of them, they had very good statistics about the traffic. They knew everything about the traffic. They went out every year and counted all the cars going this way, all the cars going that way, and the cars parked. And then they came to the mayor and said, this is a prognosis for next year. We need more lanes, we need more this, we need more that. They have organized themselves very well and have fantastic influence on city planning. But in no city anywhere were there a department for public space and pedestrians. And in no city anywhere did we know anything about how the people in the cities use their city. And that meant that everything was known about traffic, nothing was known about people. And if you had such a situation, you go for what you know about. So traffic was planned, people were ignored. And we could see over these 50 years that gradually many qualities were eroded in the cities because of this love of traffic and love of cars and neglect of people, and also that we didn't know about people. So this is the end of this 50-year period. This little man is standing in Dubai, and he's looking at modernism and motorism, and he's wondering, what good is there in this for me, and how do I get across the street? I'm going now to tell you about that there has been, in the last 10-15 years, a rather remarkable change of paradigm. Modernism and motorism is fading out as the dominating paradigms. And we have a new set of demands for city planning, which I think every mayor in the world I've come across, he will say, if I show him this, would you like a livable, sustainable and healthy city? He'll say, that's my program. That's what we do in this city. We want to do. So we have a new set of goals which we are following in city planning after these 50 years of modernism and motorism. The first about the lively and the livable city, that we can say that throughout the history of man there's been nothing more interesting in cities than other people. We can follow this throughout history and we know that man is a social animal. I know that all of you have mobile phones in the pocket and check them all the time, but think about being placed out in the desert of Sahara and having your mobile phone and no access to other people. You will not be happy. So, meeting other people is part of what is essential for Homo sapiens, and we've always had the meeting of other people, the meeting with other people as a major thing of knowing about society, of entertainment, of joy. These little boys there in Italy, they are looking at the girls, and that is one of the oldest city activities of all of them. And it's still going on, in spite of the Facebook. I always thought that when you get older, you stop watching girls, but that's not true. Because beauty is beauty, and it doesn't matter how old you are, but when you're too old, you cannot remember why it was important, but it's still beautiful. So, with smaller households, with more leisure time, with living longer, we have much more time in our hands, so we have easily time enough to use the public spaces and use the iPhones and whatever. And that is what is happening. In the 15 years, where the cyberspace really has unfolded, public spaces around the world has also seen a remarkable renaissance. And that is because we have more time, but we still are social animals. The greatest interest is still people. The biggest attraction in cities are its people.
Profesor dr. arhitect Jan Gehl a precizat că planificarea urbană trebuie realizată astfel încât să fie cât mai prietenoasă cu oamenii și să includă centre de relaxare, zone verzi, trotuare și piste pentru bicicliști cât mai late, să încurajeze locuitorii să circule cât mai mult pe jos sau cu bicicleta și cât mai puțin cu autoturismul personal.
We have got now two new challenges. One is that we must make sustainable cities. It's so that now there are 50% of the world's population are living in cities, but it's estimated that in 20 years' time there will be 70%, 7 billion people living in cities. And also it's been found out that the majority of all the climate problems comes from the cities. So it's in the cities, they should be the first to address the climate challenge. And there is a very famous organization now called the C40, which are the mayors of 40 most important cities in the world, who come together once a year to discuss how they can do something for making a better answer to the sustainability questions. So there's a strong movement for making more sustainable cities. We know that if people walk more, or if they bicycle more, that's very good for climate. But also we know now that having a good public realm is very important for improving the public transportation systems. Because any travel with public transportation, there is an element of walking to the train or the bus and going home again at all times of day and night. So good public rail and good public transportation, they are brothers and sisters. It is generally believed among city planners that in 20-30 years, a great proportion of all transportation would be done by smart public transportation systems. And that means that it will be more and more important to have good public rail to support this. Also, it is generally believed that the good old technology from Detroit in 1905 of the motor car, of giving each guy a rubber wheel in each corner, and that is urban mobility. That is generally known now as being a very bad idea for the very big cities we are going to have and the high crowding in cities we are going to have. And it is believed that we can do much smarter technologies than that old 1905 technology from Detroit. And many companies are working on this just now. I heard a week ago, I was at a conference where a guy from Siemens said that in 20 years there will hardly be any cars as we know them, and it will have shifted. He would not say how it would have shifted, he just said it would change because motor cars, traditional motor cars, is not a very famous idea in a modern city where we should look after health and after the climate and have room to move about. The third big driver now is health. And it's been found now in America and Australia, and especially in Saudi Arabia, they are the worst, that more people die of not moving than earlier on died of smoking too many cigarettes. So there's such a great proportion of the populations who are overweight, and that is now the big killer. And so everything is done to say we must change the way we build our cities, because if we look closely, we built for 50 years cities. We did everything to make sure it was not necessary for you to move. You could drive to anything and drive in here and drive in there. And so a lot of driving was taking place. The idea was that everybody would be so clever as to go up the escalator to the fitness center 2 times a week and sit for 2 hours in the rowing machine. But it has proved that only some people do it, and in some periods in their life. If you think of the whole life, there are many periods where you haven't got time or it's inconvenient. You don't. You have the intention to go to the fitness center, but then you don't go actually. Also, now we are living much longer, and it's not so attractive in all age groups use this opportunity. So it is realized that instead of making city planning which invites people to be inactive, we must now make city planning which invites people to be active. And that would be foremost walking and bicycling every day. The doctors would tell us that 1 hour of moderate activity per day will actually give you an extra lifespan of 7 years, but more importantly, it will be a much better quality of life when you are adult, but also especially when you're older, and it will be much cheaper for society, because these old people who have moved throughout their lives, they're much cheaper for a health system. They don't need that many doctors, hospitals, and pills. So it's found that the best health policy of all of them is to make people move every day a little bit. And we can do it as city planners. That's just doing the opposite of what we're used to. We also have from the World Health Organization now a strong action plan saying that everything should be done to have people walk and bike as much as possible in the day-to-day situation. And that means we have about bicycling, we have 2 types of bicycling. We have Sunday bicycling, that is what you do in the weekends in the woods, and we have Monday bicycling, that is going to work and going to school. And it's the Monday bicycling in this case which is the interesting one, because that's what makes you active every day. So we can start, we can actually find out that if you want lively, livable, sustainable and healthy cities, it could be a very, very good idea to look after how the people in the city are treated, how pedestrian, public life, and maybe bicycles if you don't have many hills. And I've heard that you have many hills in Alba Giulia, but not in the city. I've even seen the hills you have, and I think they are not too hilly. Bicycling could happen here. We'll talk about that later.
Gell susține că 4 dintre cele mai bune orașe pentru locuit sunt Copenhaga, Stockholm, Melbourne și Sydney. Modelul Copenhaga a fost preluat și de alte orașe, precum Melbourne, New York, Moscova, Tokyo, Viena, etc.
Do we have cities who have this distinct policy? In this city we do everything to make people walk and bike as much as possible. Yes, we do have such cities, and I'll invite you to my hometown of Copenhagen, which for 54 years, 53 years, have actually been into such a policy. Very, very early in 1962, they started to push out the cars from the major streets, and everybody was screaming, oh, the businesses will go broke, and people, it's against our mentality, it's too cold in Scandinavia, it can never happen, it will be a failure. They did it anyway, and it was a big success. They also said originally, we are Danes, we are not Italians, we'll never use public space. Next year we started to be Italians, and we become more and more Italian as years go by. Copenhagen became one of the first pioneers to push cars out of the city. And also Copenhagen became the first city in the world where the life of the city was systematically studied, so that the city planners would know what would the cars want, what would the people want, and knew that when they made improvements for people, they could have right away information from the university about how it worked, and it worked very well. The more they did, the more people came out, the more life, the more we became Italians. And when I retired as a professor, I got this nice letter from the mayor of Copenhagen saying, if you guys in university had not made all these studies of the life of the city, we politicians would never have had the courage to make Copenhagen the most livable city in the world. So this documentation is very important for knowing what to do and for having arguments when the businessmen come and say, oh, you ruined my business. No, I didn't ruin my business, your business, because I can see here that there are 5,000 more people passing your shop now. Are you sure you're a good businessman? And the mayor will say that's a very good discussion because it's very short, and he will leave quickly, and he'll start to think about what good business is in the 21st century. Copenhagen was the first, and this method of studying the life of the city to inform the city policy, that is now what is used all over the world. Started here, and they, just to give you an idea of what has happened in Copenhagen, because in Copenhagen for 53 years, every year they made the city a little bit better. And they just small little steps, but this was the start where the main street was clear of traffic, and this is the situation now. This is all the spaces where it's not pedestrian streets, some of them are shared streets or pedestrian priority, but in all these places, concerns for people have been prioritized as the most important. And that, of course, has made the city center quite wonderful. Looking back now, and that's the privilege of looking back for 50 years, I can clearly see some 3-4 steps in this development of a people-friendly city. The first concern was to make more room for people to walk. That was very much a concern for the businessmen because the customers should be able to walk through the city and look at the shops. So in the first 20 years there was emphasis on making pedestrian spaces and improving walking promenade. But then came the next 20 years, that was when emphasis moved towards sitting and recreation and enjoying the city and having a good time. And that is the next stage, and that is because there was people had more money, a little bit more money. They could just afford a cappuccino now. And also there was a time when we started to see the tourism flourish. And when tourists come to a city, they would like to sit and enjoy. They would not like to be pushed around by cars. And also the Danish people had been tourists and seen wonderful cities in Italy and Greece and Spain. And they came home and said, oh, if we are having a wonderful city, we need sidewalk cafes and all this stuff. So all this sprang up, and all the parking was pushed out of the inner city, and instead you have cappuccino culture coming in. The third stage where we are now is more and more focused on sports, recreation, active play, and also you can see that the public spaces get more and more architecturally exciting. They are for skateboarding, for swimming. We have in the river of Copenhagen, we have 3 swimming pools now because the river is so clean, or the harbor is so clean you can swim in it. So this is the third phase. And then in 2009, Copenhagen published a strategy for the city saying, we will be the best city for people in the world. That's the official policy, and I was very happy to see that line in your mayor's table yesterday. This one has a great emphasis. It's about saying, walk more, that's good for your health. Walk more, that's good for the climate. Spend more time outdoors, that's good for the health. But primarily all this about public life, that's good for social inclusion, that's good for a friendly society, that's good for a safe city, and that's good for democracy. So there's an official policy that we shall leave our private fortresses and come more out, and by doing so, they need to have better public spaces. And we found distinctly that if we make better public spaces, people spend more time outdoors with other people. We think it's extremely important that you meet your fellow citizens face to face almost every day and feel, this is my society, this is my Alba Giulia, this is what matters for me, and these are the people, my friends, my neighbors, whatever. As part of this policy, they are now into phase 4. So now it's not the city center, which should be nice to tourists and to locals, but it's the whole city. And they are changing all the streets in the city, which used to be 3, 4, 5 lane asphalt. They are changing all of them into 2-way streets with a median, with street trees, with bicycle lanes, and with sidewalks. This lower street is much more beautiful, it's much more safe, very few accidents are happening, and smart modern traffic engineering can have the same capacity in the low street as the 1970 guys could have on the top street. Have we reached this stage in Copenhagen? No. You don't have to push to get across, but what is happening is this, that whenever you have a small street going into a big street, the sidewalk and the bicycle lane is taken across. The small street is narrowed a bit so that the car coming from the small street will have to slow down, go up on the sidewalk, look up and down, and then you can go out. And that is, of course, to prioritize, saying that pedestrians and bicycles, they are just as important as any guy in a Mercedes-Benz. And if you are Mayor Street, they should be prioritized. So I think that's wonderful, that's nice. But then I talked to my daughter, and she said, oh, Papa, it's so wonderful, we've got this system now in our neighborhood. And would you imagine, granddaughter Laura, who's 7, she can now walk all the way to school on her own because she can stay on the sidewalk all the way to school and doesn't have to cross any streets anymore. But some Mercedes would have to cross 4 streets in this area, but Laura can walk that. I think that's very important for the quality of a city, that the children can walk as much as possible to the school, and that you can get rid of all these silly parents who drive too fast with their kids to school. It's even been found that if the kid walks to school or bicycles to school, they learn more because they are more fresh in their head than if they are sped up on the way to school. But that's another story. Another item which is very important in Copenhagen is what has been done for the bicycles. It has, ever since the 1970s, especially the oil crisis, everything has been done to make sure that you have a good, safe bicycle system and a strong invitation to bicycle. So there is a citywide bicycle network, and it is good bicycle lanes with a curb to the sidewalk and another curb to the traffic. And over the years, this has developed into a complete transportation. You can transport everything. Many citizens and people in the city have no car at all. They can do everything without. Every third family in Copenhagen, they have a cargo bike so that they can bring their kids to school, and they can do it safely on the bicycle lanes. The problems in a bicycle system is the crossings, and there they found a number of things you can do to make it much safer for a bicycle to go through a crossing. And also to make a good bicycle system, it should be integrated with the other transport systems, so all taxis have to take 2 bicycles, because if your girlfriend's bike have a puncture, you can just jump on a taxi and continue. Also, all the trains, you can take your bicycles, and it's for free, and it's very popular. Say when myself and my wife, we go out to my son, we pedal 2 kilometers to the train station, take the bikes in the train, go 20 kilometers with the train, and then we bike 2 kilometers. Then we get 24 kilometers away, and we get a bit of exercise also. This is a Danish suburban train station with the bicycle departments in the trains. Over the years, there's really developed a bicycle culture. Everybody bicycles, and it's good. It's fair for businessmen to come to meeting with the bicycle helmets, and pregnant mothers and children, everything. Bass players, they of course can go bicycling. The crown prince is doing bicycling with the next king who's sitting down there, and also the crown princess with more princes, and the king, the new king next to him. He's also bicycling, and even ordinary people like myself and my wife, we are bicycling. I'll tell you the story of my wife and I, we had a 45th, and that's the psychologist I'm talking about. We had a 45th anniversary, and we were sitting there. It was August, and we thought we should celebrate by having a good dinner. And then we took our bicycles. We were about 70 years, many years ago, but we were about 70 years old. And then we took our bicycles, and then we started to pedal into the city. We went around and on bicycle lanes, safe and side by side, and we went around in the city and saw all the nice squares and over the harbor. And then we found a place to have a very good dinner on an outdoor restaurant, and then we had 1 glass of red wine, too much, but that's all right when you're bicycling. And then you could sort of get back again. And when we were back, we realized we'd done 20 kilometers on the day of our 45th anniversary on a bicycle. And then we thought about that it was quite marvelous to live in a city where you could do just that. And we realized that when we were married, this was absolutely impossible. That many improvements have happened in the 45 years. And that was when I started to think about that the trick is that every year the city should be a little bit better than last year. In Copenhagen we have a few problems now, actually. we have serious congestion on bicycle lanes. Already in 2002, they started to talk about it. And then it's been, for quite a long time, it's been the policy to take more asphalt from the cars. And it is quite a good thing. So what has happened is they just double the bicycle lanes. And that is very good transport economy, because a bicycle lane can take 5 times more people than can a car lane. So if you have enough bicycles, it's very good economy to say we take one in the car lane and make it a bike lane, because we can have more people going through the street, more traffic in this way. So that's what they're doing. And also they've been forced to double the capacity in the trains because there were so many bicycles in the trains. And now they're doing everything to make it smart to bicycle. It should be quicker and more convenient to bicycle than doing anything else, especially in cars. So they're putting in little bicycle bridges over the river, over the big streets, and everywhere where you can have a shortcut, they put in little bicycle and pedestrian bridges. And the net result of all this is that at this point, 37% of everybody are using their bicycles to go to work or to universities. And that is not great, because the latest figure that we are now up to 45% of everybody going to work on bicycles. And these are figures from September. In this winter, it's a little bit less, but not much, because if you are used to bicycle and you have the clothes for it, you continue during the winter. It has been found that it's very good economy. Every time a person do a kilometer on a bicycle, the society saves, I can't see the figures here, but something like a quarter of a euro is saved. And it's the same guy doing the same kilometer in a car, the society loses 17 cents euro. So it's actually good economy. And also it's been found that accidents are going down and down and down. The more people that are bicycling, the more safe it is. This is the end of the visit to Copenhagen. This is a crossing in Copenhagen, where you can see the various elements, the pedestrians moving about, the bicycle, only the lanes which have an accident, which are dangerous, they're blue, so that not everything is blue, but only the ones where you should have special attention. This is how it looks like. And it's interesting that a city like Copenhagen, time and again, is named the most livable city in the world. I think that a very great importance in this is that it is a city which is very kind to the people who are in the city. So, what is this? Oh my God. Is this my grandmother? No. It is the Danish Minister of Culture. And she came up to me one day and said, Jan, I had to be photographed for European Enquete of Cultural Ministers. We should sit in our favorite sofa and read our favorite book. I took your book, Jan, so that people could see what I'm interested in as a Minister of Culture. I was very proud, but I was even more proud because this lady, she has changed the Danish official policy for architecture to being put people first. And just to show you that it is sort of a national phenomenon, this is the government, the ministers of the government going up to the Queen to receive their permissions as ministers, not in limousines, but on bicycles. And they told me that they just put the bicycles over to the guards and said, "Would you look after my bicycle? I have some business with the Queen." Then they went in, and no bicycles were stolen that day. But and to me, it's very important that everybody in society, the old and the children, the royalty and the politicians, and the small school children and the old guys, they're all bicycling and showing it. Are there other cities who have similar policies? Yes. And I will not have much time to go through this, actually very little time. A city like Melbourne in Australia has done remarkable turnaround. It was one of the worst abandoned cities, only offices and no life in the weekends, no people living there. But they made a very, very concerted effort. They said, in this city of streets, we shall walk. So all sidewalks 8 meters wide, granite. You need shade, so trees. You have very fine furniture, and they have this policy that you walk. They do everything to make it comfortable to walk. And by now, Melbourne is by far the nicest city in the southern hemisphere. It's got really a hint of tourist, but the weather is much better in Melbourne. Also, they're doing quite a bit for bicycles, and they call it Copenhagen system. And what is Copenhagen system? That is when the parked cars are protecting the bicycles. Here is one of their lanes, and I was asked yesterday, what can you do here? Maybe you do this. There is some rumble lines, and then there's a little buffer zone, and then there's painted a bicycle lane, which is very cheap to do, and that could, so the bicycles don't go out there and the cars don't go in there. This is what they do in Melbourne. Melbourne is a miracle, and Melbourne, if you don't know what to do, move to Melbourne, I would say. I could go on with a number of other cities. I could go on with the city of Sydney, which, because it's very envious of Melbourne, they want to Melbourneize Sydney. And we are working hard to Melbourneize Sydney. I'll not go into details. I could tell you about that just 2 weeks ago I was in Kazakhstan. They haven't done much yet, but they certainly have got the book in Kazakh, and they promised to read it, so that's a good sign. If you look at the list of livable cities in the world, you can see in many of the lists that Copenhagen, Melbourne, Sydney, Stockholm, whatever, these kind of cities who have done a lot for people in the city, they are invariably very highly placed in these lists of livable places. So, inviting you to New York. In 2007, the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, he declared in a conference, I will make New York the most sustainable metropole in the world in no time to speak of. That means while he was still mayor, because already by that time there were rumors that he wanted to be president one day, so he wanted to do something spectacular in New York. He had a plan for New York, how you should make New York very sustainable, and he said that it's a perfect city for bicycling. I will not have 1 million commuter cars in Manhattan every day. I will use the subway, use the sidewalks, use the wide streets to have bicycle lanes. New York is flat, it's compact, and its wide streets is perfect for bicycling. So he promised to make, I think it's 5,000 kilometers of bicycle lanes in a very short period of time. The first thing which happened was that the planning mayor and the transport mayor, they came to Copenhagen to see what was going on there. And that's many of the cities I've talked to. We have a little nice study tour in Copenhagen to see what can be done. Here you can see they're studying the curbs, how to separate the bicycle lanes. These two female mayors from New York, they got so excited about bicycling that we couldn't get the bicycles away from them in the night. They were there for 48 hours. And we only got the bicycles back in the airport, and then in the airport they say, we want a city like this one. When can we start? And I was quick, I said, we start Monday, what about that? So we started Monday because they're very quick in America. So already the next year they started in the big style, putting in bicycle lanes, Copenhagen style, where the parked cars protect the bicyclists, and they do not only do it in Manhattan, they do it in all the 5 boroughs of New York, Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island. Then after a while they said, why couldn't we have a Champs-Élysées of America? We realized that in New York there were not a single bench and there were no sidewalk cafes. And you always, in New York, you have to come up from the subway and then you have to run to the office and run back. And then they started to think maybe Broadway could be turned. And we found out that Broadway was not needed in the traffic system, so it was decided to take Broadway out. So Broadway in 2009, all the major crossings of Broadway with avenues were taken out. Broadway was stopped as a thoroughfare, and Times Square changed from one day to the other, from this to this. And at once it was full of people, and taxi drivers were grumbling and said, oh, you are ruining New York. And Mayor said it's only an experiment. Half a year later, he came out and said it's not an experiment anymore. It's the biggest success in New American planning history. It will stay forever. Now they just to show you the character, the New York Times and the New Yorker have this front page showing that the next step could be to bring in grass and bison and emphasize the recreational aspect. All this going on in New York in 2009 and 10 was rumored, and I gave a lecture about all this in Montreal, and a nice man came galloping up to me and said, I'm the deputy mayor from Moscow. Can you come and do New York for Moscow? We want to humanize Moscow in 12 months. And Moscow was really hard and is really hard hit by traffic. This is a one-way street here. And this is a typical nice local street. Also, they have some funny rules of parking that because freedom from communism is you can park everywhere. But that's only for a time, then they have to regulate it. Main Street Moscow was not so good because there was not enough parking. They had allowed parking to happen on the sidewalk on Main Street Moscow. There were 1 meter left for pedestrians, and we were able to point out that hardly any people anymore used the streets of Moscow. There was no pedestrian traffic, there was hardly any street life, because it was all occupied by cars. Then, over there, the first thing they did was they published all my books, and here they are, and the worried guy is the Danish ambassador. And then we were commissioned to do a study of how Moscow worked, and we found that it didn't work at all, really. And then in the process, I was invited up to Sobyanin, and he said, what would be your report? I said, yeah, sorry about this one. Parking on Main Street Moscow is not the biggest, greatest idea I ever saw. Maybe I will mention that should be changed. And 2 months later, I was back. There were no cars on Main Street Moscow sidewalks because they have very efficient democracy. So the mayor had just thought that why not make an improvement right away? And if the Moscovites forget about new rules, they have this little car from the mayor who goes up and down and pick up the cars and take them to Siberia. I think they're not supposed to come back, and you only do that once. And you think this is very cruel city planning policy. But then look at this one from Lithuania. This is the mayor of Lithuania going around telling people not to park in his bike lanes. This was part of the election campaign, and I know you are having election campaign shortly. So maybe you could do something with some hardware from the army. But in Moscow, they have really made a miracle. 1.5 years later, you can see here parked cars, a lot of no space for people, no benches, and a lot of advertisements in the air. A year and a half later, benches all the way, a grey street is becoming to be green, and all the advertisement has disappeared, so you can see Kremlin. And also, people have been able to take their overcoats off. It's really been a miracle. So now, Mr. Sobyanin is actually, and to me this is great news, that the mayor of Moscow goes around telling cities that it's wonderful to be more livable and we should all make steps to be a more livable city in the 21st century. Summing up, we have found that data about how people use the cities are very important for improving them for people, because for many years we've had no data, no knowledge. We just loved people, but we knew nothing about how they used the city and how it could be better. But we have found out and shown in cities around the world that data is the key to improvement, data about people. And so I could end up by saying, welcome to the 21st century.
În ceea ce privește orașul Alba Iulia, Ghel a arătat că are mari speranțe cu privire la atractivitatea locuirii și a găsit o dragoste pentru oraș, respectiv o cetate deosebită care poate fi dezvoltată mai mult.
And given the fact that there are now 3 books out in Romanian, and I have had the impression here that they are read, they have studied, I have the great hope for the future of the livability situation in the Romanian cities, and especially in Alba Iulia, where I found this great love for the city and this extremely fine fabric, where you have this citadel, which could be developed further as a fantastic central park for a wonderful livable city. So I wish you good luck, and I have 2 questions.
Încrezător, primarul Mircea Hava a spus că lucrurile se vor schimba și la Alba Iulia, unde se va încerca aplicarea metodelor propuse de Jan Ghel.
Eu cred că se pot face, se pot produce și în Alba Iulia. Nu într-o săptămână, nu într-un an, dar în timp. Adică tot ce construim de aici încolo și tot ceea ce avem, să le facem ca să fie, să facem orașul ca să fie locuitorilor. Să le placă să locuiască aici.
There has been around for maybe ever since the 60s, there's been around 2 great forces which have been very dominant in city planning. One is the modernistic way of building cities and making architecture, and the other one is the invasion of the motor car, which has really started to completely dominate city planning to such an extent that in many places they still think that the major purpose of city planning is to make the cars happy and have room for more cars. Of course, if you have other ideas about what a good city is for people, then you can run into opposition from both the architects who are very happy about the modernistic ideas, and you can certainly run into opposition from traffic engineers and conservative politicians and citizens who just bought a car and are ready to go, and then comes this guy and say maybe it's not the smartest thing in cities to have more cars. Over the years I've studied very much this question about what would people like in cities, and I'm especially focused on the way we use the public spaces, the way we use the streets and the squares and the parks, because that is a place, that is the city as a meeting place. And the city has throughout history been an important meeting place for the citizens. And though we have internet and we have telephones nowadays, then still the city is very important as a meeting place where you can meet your citizens face to face and you can see what's going on in society, where you can have events and so forth. And exactly this, the city as a meeting place, was the thing which was suppressed in the many years of modernist and motor-oriented planning, where they actually really made the cities in such a way that people try not to be out in the city, not to be on the sidewalk, not to meet their fellow citizens. It is a very interesting thing that whenever we have a dictator, the first thing he would do is to say people are not allowed to meet in the streets and talk for more than 2 or 3 in a group. And it's also interesting that when Franco was dead in Spain and they shifted from military dictatorship to democracy, the first thing they did in Barcelona was to build 200 squares and parks to celebrate that now people could meet again and talk again to their fellow citizens in the public forum. So all this about meeting other people, that's very deep in the heart of people, that we are social animals. We can never survive rather much long time if we are not in contact with other people. And the city always provided this contact on a low level but very popular level, in such a way that other people in the city is the biggest attraction of all. If you show pictures of cities with no people and cities with people, everybody would say, I like the picture with the city with people in the scenery much more than I like the empty scene. The empty scene is a sign that something is wrong, that why have the other ones left? There must be unsafe or bad here. And why are all these people here? It must be because it's a good place. So we are very, very interested in other people, meeting other people, and people is the biggest attraction. And that has been the problem, that for many years we have ignored the people in the city and just gone along building buildings which make the developers happy and building roads which make the cars happy, and nobody has looked after the people. But we can do a lot, and now many more and more cities are really turning towards finding the formulas for inviting the people to use their cities. I think that it is very easy to point out that this message of that we have forgotten to take any care for people in city planning for such a long time is a message which is very easily understood by the ordinary people. The moment you show them pictures of what was done and how it could have been or how it could be in the future, most people, they at once say we would rather like this than we like what we have. And of course, when people, general people, start to ask for these things, then politicians will listen. The ones who have had most difficulties in listening and in changing their ways are actually many of the planners and architects. Some architects could even be called quite arrogant about these things, because there still is this idea that if it looks interesting, it must be good, but that is not so. So developers and planners, architects and traffic engineers, they have not been too happy about these messages, but the ordinary people, the moment it was told to them and an alternative practice was demonstrated, and we had research proving that it was very important and it could be made, that moment we saw that gradually and in greater and greater tempo, the mindsets were changed and people started to ask very heavily that their cities be made more livable, better quality for people. I see in Alba Giulia many of the things you see in cities all over the world, which for many years have been going along on the modernistic planning principles and going along with traffic planning as some major concern in the city hall. So many of the same aspects are to be seen here. But also I see here that there is a rather extraordinary urban fabric with some qualities, especially around and in the citadel as the central square of Alba Giulia. So I see that there is very strong things to build a fantastic city upon. And also I see that maybe mostly what is needed is a broom to clean up a little bit after the great influx of motor cars, so we can have a better balance between people needs and traffic needs. It's not so far as I see it, because the basics, the urban structure has many qualities, and many cities all over the world would envy you if they had the similar qualities to start from. I think that question is just like asking the doctor the moment he comes into the door and see the patient on the sofa, what can we do with this patient, doctor? And I would say I would have to investigate the patient a bit. I will have to find out more about what is the situation here, what are the challenges, what are the potentials, and what are the problems. And to do that, in all the cities I have been involved in, we make a survey. We try to find out how is the city used today by the people, and what kind of spaces are available, how are they linked, where are the problems, where are the possibilities. And then based on this, you can make a diagnosis, and then you can sketch a cure and prescribe some medicine. So it's a process, it's not something about do this, do that, do that. Of course, the main difference between Eastern and Western Europe is that the access to having motor cars happened here much later than it happened in West Europe. In Western Europe, we've had 50, 60 years to get used to motor car, find out what is good for, what is not good for, and to plan how to have a good balance between motor car and the other uses of the city. Over in the Eastern Europe, you only have had 25 years of access to buying motor cars, and actually what has developed is first there was a big hunger for motor car, and now then there was a big love for motor car, a heavy love affair, and you couldn't have enough of the good thing. And actually you got too many of the good thing too quickly because the love overwhelmed you. So in many Eastern European countries you have more cars than we have in Sweden and Denmark and Norway, just to mention something, because it has been slower and it's been more, we learned to live with how many we really needed, and it was not, after a while, it was not that much of a status symbol. It was some practical tool which was expensive, so you considered whether it was smart or whatever. And then they also developed the public transportation and the bicycle systems, so you have a better choice of things for mobility. So I see really that the one big difference today is that here we are still in the end of the love affair with the motor car. In many of the Western countries, the love affair is over, and we've started to look upon it as in an old marriage, where you've been married for a long time, you find your ways, but you're not doing silly things no more.